I don't know if you've ever seen the west of Ireland and the North Atlantic. It's a very stormy, tumultuous sea, very wind-tossed, very romantic, and very scary. Which I guess, romance is about as scary a thing as there is. And the Irish have always sort of traditionally been afraid of going out to the sea. Partly because it's the North Atlantic, and partly because they've traditionally been very bad at building boats. I just have one word for illustration: the Titanic. But the soil in the west of Ireland is not sufficient to sustain them. So they had to go out. And when the men would go out, their wives and their mothers would all wait for them to come back, and oftentimes, by the time their bodies washed up onto the shore, they'd be so disfigured that they couldn't tell one husband from another. Which I hear is a problem a lot of Irish women have, even if their husbands are alive, but that's another story. So when people go to Ireland and they come back with these big bulky sweaters, and they have all these kinds of stitches in them. I don't know if you know this, but what they are is the wives would knit these, and each little stitch and line and swirl is either a prayer or a charm or a blessing meant to protect their husband when they went out to sea. And if it worked, of course, their husbands would come back. And if it didn't, because fish don't eat wool, they could tell who was who by the stitching on the sweater. I just think that's a charming story. Let's talk about what it means to recognize Christ and to be recognized by Christ. In today's text, you get this idea of suffering for what is good, that's to be expected, not avoided. That there's something about this faith that is supposed to make us visibly strange in the world. Not nice, not tame, somehow we are marked by it. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed, and do not fear what they fear. Peter's writing to a people who are already suffering. Not because they failed, but because they were faithful. Do not fear what they fear. Be ready to give an account, not of your accomplishments, but of your hope. And down through the years, I don't know how it changed or when it changed. I'm sure it was a very long and gradual thing, but Christianity turned into this thing that became a faith that protects you and makes you happy, rather than a faith that marks you, that wounds you. It's the same with Doubting Thomas. We all know the story of Doubting Thomas, right? By the way, how many of us would just hate it if we were known for the one time we blew it? I mean, Thomas does wonderful things, up to that point, and afterwards he goes off and he becomes an evangelist. I believe Thomas went to almost all the way to India. But here's what he's known for: Doubting Thomas. But here's the interesting thing about this story. think about the theology of comfort that we've all come to just accept as what it's supposed to be about. This idea that if we follow Jesus, life gets easier. And Thomas's doubt wasn't a lack of faith. Thomas's doubt was probably based on the fact that he knew what crucifixion does to a body. And Christ, the risen Christ, does not float above his wounds. He doesn't repair them on the resurrection. He keeps them and shows them to Thomas. Put your finger in my hands. Put your hand in my side. That's how you know it's Jesus, because there are wounds. That's how Thomas knew it was Jesus, because he had wounds. And if the risen Christ still has wounds, why do we think resurrection means that we won't? Doubt is not the enemy. Forgetting what real faith costs is. And that should trouble us a little bit, I think, because we've built churches to celebrate polish and strength, while the risen Christ is recognized by his scars, which forces the question, not just why do we hide our scars, but why are we so afraid of being scarred in the first place? Why do we beg for safety from the very thing Christ uses to prove who he is? In 2 Corinthians 11, Paul is describing his ministry. He's naming his ministry in this way, not to glorify suffering, but to name it. Are they servants of Christ? And of course, he knows what he sounds like. I speak as if I'm insane. I more so. In far more labors, in far more imprisonments, beaten times without number, often in danger of death. 5 times I received the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship, through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. He does not say or give his credentials as the number of conversions he has. His credentials are his wounds. The church has traded sacrificial strangeness for respectable sameness and safeness. We want the world to love us, but Christ gave us marks so the world would recognize us. Anybody here familiar with Thornton Wilder? You probably know his most famous work, Our Town, the play. Well, he has a one-act play. It's called The Angel That Troubled the Waters, and a physician, just weary and wounded, comes to the pool seeking healing. And when the angel appears, he's actually there. He's the one who can step in first. But the angel stops him and says, "No, this healing is not for you." And the physician begs him to reconsider and asks why he can't be healed. And this is the angel's response. Without your wounds, where would your power be? It is your very remorse that makes your low voice tremble into the hearts of men. The very angels themselves cannot persuade the wretched and blundering children on earth as can one human being broken on the wheels of living. In love's service, only the wounded soldier can serve. What if the healing or comfort you may have been praying for years, or even now, is the very thing that God withholds? Not out of cruelty, but out of calling. What if your scars are your sermon? What if Christ isn't looking for perfection, but recognition? I found the story that I told earlier about Simeon Stylites on the way, because I was looking for this one. One of my favorite stories, the story of St. Lawrence. It's the middle of the 3rd century. And the Roman Empire is trying to crush the growing Christian movement. And so they had Pope Sixtus II, which is confusing, I know, but that's his name, had him killed. And then the Roman Empire reached out to Lawrence, who was one of the deacons that served that pope, and told him he had to turn over the treasures of the church. So what he did was he took all the gold and silver items that were in the church. He went into town and he sold them, and he gave all of the money from that to the poor and the widow and the orphans. And then he went back to the emperor, and he didn't come back with gold. What he did is he brought with him the poor and the broken and the sick. And he turned and he said, "These are the treasures of the church." It probably won't surprise you that the empire did not find that very funny. So they killed him, slowly, roasting him alive on a grate. And here's one of my favorite things, because it's not really sure, nobody knows really sure if this is true or if this was added later just to, add a little twist to the empire. But it is said that while they were doing that, as he's dying, sitting on this grate, being grilled to death, he says, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." That's what happens when you're not afraid of scars. That's what happens when you know that your worth, the meaning to yourself is in the wounds that you bear in the name of Christ. So, live real good. Live real good, and I promise you'll get beat up real bad. So when you wash up on that other shore, even though you've been disfigured beyond recognition, the angels are going to see you there and they'll go, "What is that? We're not even sure that it's human." But Jesus will say, "No, that's human. I know that one." And they'll say, "Jesus, how do you know that one?" And he'll say, "You see that sweater he's got on? every stitch a prayer, every thread a scar, every mark a testimony. And it makes me wonder now what scars you're waiting to be healed instead of using as your source of power. Makes me wonder where you might have mistaken healing for holiness or approval from God. The world won't recognize you. That's fine. Jesus kept his scars. So live marked, love broken. And when the fire comes, stand tall and say, turn me over, I'm done on this side. Today we celebrate communion.